The man who'd secretly paid for strangers' surgeries, gifted his crew Harley-Davidsons, and donated millions without fanfare now stood frozen at a bank counter. The Hollywood icon, disguised in a faded hoodie, his face hidden under a cap, had just been told he wasn't important enough for service. No appointment, no help. The receptionist sneered, eyeing his worn jeans. But Hollywood icon wasn't here for revenge. He needed answers. His accounts were frozen, his cards blocked. A $182 million glitch that threatened to expose his darkest secret. Because hidden in his pocket was a crumpled letter, 16 years old, stamped with a name he hadn't spoken since Hollywood stole his life, Emily. This wasn't just about money. It was about the woman who vanished, and the lie that could destroy him. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and stay tuned. What the bank discovered next changed everything. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she entered the numbers from the card. At first, she looked indifferent. Then, her expression changed. Her eyes widened, her posture stiffened. Hollywood icon saw it. The exact moment she realized who he was. The arrogance in her voice was gone, replaced with confusion, a flicker of panic. "Oh, Mr. Hollywood icon, I didn't realize," she stammered, her hands trembling slightly. Hollywood icon tilted his head, watching her reaction. Moments ago, she had dismissed him without a thought. Now, she struggled to form a sentence. A manager in a sleek navy suit suddenly appeared, sensing the tension. His eyes darted between Hollywood icon and the receptionist. "Is there a problem here?" he asked smoothly, his tone controlled but urgent. Hollywood icon turned to face him. His patience was wearing thin. "Yes, apparently I'm not important enough to be helped at my own bank," Hollywood icon said evenly. The manager's face paled. Around them, people had started to notice. Whispers spread. A few customers turned, their eyes widening. Phones appeared. Someone muttered his name. The manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Hollywood icon, I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. We can, of course, assist you right away." Hollywood icon exhaled slowly. He could feel the shift in the room. A minute ago, he was a nobody in their eyes. Now, they were scrambling to correct their mistake. But it wasn't just about him. It was about something deeper. He had spent his life avoiding privilege, refusing to let his fame define him. But now, standing here, watching the hypocrisy unfold in real time, something in him hardened. He shook his head. "No, right here is fine." The receptionist looked mortified, avoiding his gaze as she typed hurriedly into the system. The weight of her own arrogance now crushing her. Hollywood icon leaned on the counter, exhaustion settling into his bones. He wasn't here to prove a point. He had only wanted help. But moments like this, where people judged based on appearance, where kindness was conditional, stayed with him. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the past, a different time, a different place. And a woman who had never cared about his fame, his fortune, or his status, the only person who had ever truly seen him. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut, a face he hadn't seen in years, a name that still haunted him. Emily. The receptionist's voice snapped him back. "There was a misunderstanding with your account," she said quickly, eyes still glued to the screen. "It's been resolved. You should have full access now." Hollywood icon nodded but barely heard her. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. Because in that moment, he knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about the bank. It was about unfinished business, about a past he had spent too long trying to forget. He took back his card, slipping it into his pocket. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The cold December air hit his face as he stepped outside. But he barely felt it. His mind was already racing. For years, he had tried to move forward, leaving behind the memories of a love he had lost. But maybe, just maybe, fate had other plans. Hollywood icon had barely taken a step away from the counter when the manager rushed forward, his voice laced with forced politeness. "Mr. Hollywood icon, please, allow us to make this right." Hollywood icon stopped but didn't turn around. His jaw tightened. He wasn't here for apologies. The bank manager continued, his tone growing more desperate. "We can offer you a private consultation, a more personalized experience." Hollywood icon exhaled slowly, turning just enough to meet the man's nervous gaze. Now they wanted to help. Now they wanted to treat him with respect. But what if he had just been another man? Someone without millions in his account? He looked past the manager to the receptionist. She stood frozen, avoiding his gaze, her confidence from before completely shattered. The hypocrisy made his stomach turn. Hollywood icon shook his head. "You had your chance," he said simply. The word stung. The manager flinched, scrambling to recover. "I assure you, Mr. Hollywood icon, this was just a miscommunication." Hollywood icon let out a sharp breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. A miscommunication, he repeated, or just a system that only values people when they have something to offer. The bank lobby was silent now. Every customer, every employee hung on his words. The manager shifted uncomfortably. Please, let's discuss this in private. Hollywood icon glanced around. Eyes were locked on him, phone subtly recording. The weight of attention pressed in from every direction. He wasn't here for a scene, but this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about how people treated others when they thought no one was watching. He took a step forward, his voice steady. No, right here is fine. The manager swallowed hard. Of course, I understand. But he didn't. He was just trying to fix the damage. Hollywood icon felt his patience slipping. His whole life, he had tried to stay out of the spotlight, to be just another guy living his life. But moments like this reminded him why that was impossible. No matter how much he tried to blend in, the world always saw the name, the fame, the money. But there had been one person who never had. Emily. The thought struck hard, his chest tightening. The memory of her laughter, the way she used to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she looked at him, not as a movie star, not as a millionaire, just as a man. He had spent years trying to bury the past. But standing here, watching this moment unfold, it was impossible to ignore. Because Emily was the one person who had never treated him differently, and she was gone. Hollywood icon clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He had spent too long running, but not anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the doors. The bank staff stood frozen, their apologies meaningless now. The cold air hit him as he stepped outside. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself. The past wasn't done with him, and he wasn't done with it. He needed to find her. The moment Hollywood icon stepped outside, he felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. The injustice. The way people's behavior shifted the second they realized who he was. The way money dictated how someone was treated. He had seen it before, but today, it hit differently. Today, it reminded him of her. Emily. The woman who had never cared about the things the world obsessed over. The woman who had loved him before the fame, before the money, before the world decided he was worth something. And he had let her go. His grip tightened on his bank card. Why now? Why was she suddenly back in his mind? The world moved around him, cars honking, people rushing past. But inside, he felt frozen. 16 years. That was how long it had been since he last saw her. Since she had stood on the porch of that tiny bookstore in New York, snow falling in her auburn hair, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. He had told her goodbye that night, not because he wanted to, but because he thought he had to. Because fame changed everything. And now, standing here in the cold, he realized, he had spent years trying to prove that it hadn't changed him, that he was still just Hollywood icon. But had he been lying to himself? His heart pounded against his ribs. The past wasn't something he could keep running from. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through old messages, old emails. Nothing, no trace of her. Then suddenly, a memory surfaced. A letter. Emily had written him a letter before she disappeared. He had never read it. At the time, he had been filming overseas, drowning in schedules and obligations. He had tucked it away in a book and forgotten about it. But now, after all these years, he could still see it in his mind. A soft blue envelope. Her handwriting on the front. His pulse kicked up. It was still in his house. Without hesitation, he flagged down a cab, his voice steady as he gave the address. Because if there was even a chance that letter held the answers he had been searching for, he couldn't waste another second. This time, he wasn't going to let her slip away. Hollywood icon's internal struggle and past regrets 500 words, the cab ride felt longer than it should have. Hollywood icon stared out the window, the city lights blurring past, but his mind was somewhere else. 16 years. He had buried the memories deep, convinced himself that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But now, it was all flooding back. Emily, the way she had looked at him that last night, the quiet understanding in her eyes, even as he told her goodbye. He hadn't wanted to leave, but Hollywood had swallowed him whole, press tours, filming schedules, obligations. He had promised her he'd come back, but time had slipped through his fingers, and when he finally returned, she was gone. Hollywood icon clenched his fists. He had searched, but not in the way he should have. No press, no investigators. Just a man looking for the only woman who had ever truly seen him. And he had failed. The cab jerked to a stop outside his home. He paid quickly, stepping into the quiet of the evening. His house loomed ahead, large and empty. He had lived here for years, but it never felt like home. Not really. Not without her. Hollywood icon pushed inside, his footsteps echoing through the silent halls. straight to his study. His hands trembled slightly as he moved along the massive shelves, his eyes scanning the spines of books he had collected over the years. Then he saw it, a thick, worn copy of The Great Gatsby. His chest tightened. That was where he had hidden it. He pulled the book from the shelf, flipping through its pages. His heart pounded. And then it appeared. A delicate blue envelope tucked between the pages. His breath caught. It had been here all along. Hollywood icon hesitated, his fingers tracing the edges. The past 16 years suddenly felt like seconds. Slowly, carefully, he slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the letter, unfolded the paper with shaking hands, and read the words that had waited for him all these years. Hollywood icon, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed you to know the truth. I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't want to be the thing you had to sacrifice. I saw the way the world looked at you. You were meant to shine, and I was afraid that if I held on, I would only dim your light. So I let go, not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. But if you ever find this letter, if you ever look for me, you'll know where to find me. Hollywood icon's breath hitched. His hands tightened around the page. You'll know where to find me. His mind raced. Emily's dream, the bookstore in New York. Was it possible? Without another second of hesitation, he grabbed his coat, stuffed the letter into his pocket, and bolted out the door. Hollywood icon rushed through the airport, his pulse hammering as he booked the first available flight to New York. His fingers still clutched the letter in his pocket, as if letting go of it would somehow make Emily slip through his fingers again. The words haunted him. If you ever look for me, you'll know where to find me. 16 years. Had she waited? Had she moved on? Doubt crept in, but he shoved it away. He couldn't afford hesitation now. The plane ride was excruciating. Every second stretched endlessly. He stared out the window, his mind playing memories like old film reels. Their late-night talks, the way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes, the way she had looked at him like he was just a man, not a Hollywood star. He had been young, stupid, convinced that he had all the time in the world, but time had stolen her away, and now he was racing against it. When the plane finally touched down, he moved fast, weaving through the crowds, hailing a cab the second he was outside. The Red Leaf Bookshop. Do you know it? He asked the driver. The man nodded, pulling into traffic. Hollywood icon's hands gripped his knees, his heart pounding against his ribs. What if she wasn't there? What if he was too late? The thought made his throat tighten, but he refused to let fear win. The drive through the city was a blur of lights and movement. Snow had started falling, tiny flakes swirling in the winter air. And then, the cab pulled to a stop. Hollywood icon lifted his gaze. The bookstore was still there. The large windows glowed warmly against the cold night, the soft light illuminating the shelves inside. A small Christmas wreath hung on the door. It was exactly as he remembered. His breath hitched. For a long moment he just stood there, frozen, his feet unwilling to move. Then he saw her, through the window behind the counter. Emily. His chest tightened painfully. She was older, but still her. Auburn hair tied in a loose bun, wearing the same kind of soft sweater she had always loved. She was sorting books, completely unaware that the man she once loved stood outside, staring at her like a lost soul. His feet moved before his mind could catch up. The doorbell chimed as he stepped inside. Emily glanced up, offering a polite smile. Just another customer. Then her fingers froze on the book she was holding. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted slightly, as if forming a word that never came. For the first time in 16 years, they were in the same room. Silence stretched between them. Hollywood icon swallowed hard and reached into his coat pocket. Pulled out the letter, the same one she had written all those years ago. Held it up, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with everything he had never been able to say. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. You found it, she whispered. Hollywood icon nodded, his voice barely steady. I found it, and I found you. Emily stood frozen, her eyes locked on the letter in Hollywood icon's hand. 16 years, a lifetime. Her fingers trembled as she set the book down, stepping around the counter slowly, almost hesitantly, as if she didn't trust what she was seeing. Hollywood icon felt like he couldn't breathe. He had spent so many years running, drowning himself in work, pretending he had moved on. But now, standing here, looking into her eyes, he knew the truth. He had never let her go. You're late, Emily whispered, a small, shaky smile forming on her lips. Hollywood icon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I know, he murmured, but I'm here now. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. Regret, pain, love. Hollywood icon took a cautious step forward, afraid that if he moved too fast, this moment would shatter. Emily's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe answers. Did you ever read it? She asked, nodding toward the letter. Hollywood Icon exhaled, his grip tightening around the paper. Not until yesterday. Something flickered across her face, shock, sadness, hope. And when you did, she whispered. Hollywood Icon swallowed hard. I knew I had to find you. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, laughing softly, almost embarrassed. I must look ridiculous, she muttered. Hollywood Icon shook his head. You look exactly how I remember. Her breath hitched, and she looked away, blinking rapidly, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. He took another step closer. The past 16 years had led them both here, and this time he wasn't going to let her slip away. Emily inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter as if grounding herself in reality. Hollywood Icon was real. He was standing in front of her, holding the letter she thought had been lost to time. She let out a small, shaky laugh, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought you'd come. Hollywood Icon stepped closer, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. I never stopped looking. Her lips parted, but no words came. The weight of 16 years pressed between them, missed chances, lost time, the pain of two people who had never truly let go. Emily finally exhaled, shaking her head. All these years, why now? Hollywood Icon ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering in his eyes. Because I was a coward, because I thought I had more time. And then, I found your letter. His voice dropped to something raw, something broken, and I realized I couldn't waste another second. Emily stared at him, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. You left Hollywood Icon. The words cut through the air like a blade. He didn't look away. He wouldn't. I know. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears at bay. You promised you'd come back, that we'd make it work. Hollywood Icon stepped closer, voice thick with regret. And I failed you. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you space, letting you live your life without the chaos of mine. But I was wrong, Emily. I was so wrong. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they had never said. Emily let out a slow, trembling breath. Do you know how long I waited for you? His jaw clenched. Too long. She swallowed hard, her emotions a war within her. He took a step closer. I read your letter, and I knew exactly where to find you. His voice softened. And if you tell me to leave, I will. But if there's even a part of you that's still, Emily's breath hitched. Stop, she whispered. Hollywood Icon fell silent. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. When she opened them, her gaze locked onto his. Why now? She asked again, softer this time. Hollywood Icon's voice was barely above. Because I never stopped loving you. Emily inhaled sharply, as if the words had knocked the air from her lungs. She looked away, shaking her head. 16 years is a long time, Hollywood Icon. He nodded. I know. She hesitated, and then finally she whispered, What do you want from me? Hollywood Icon took a deep breath. A second chance. The room was silent. The past, the pain, the love they had once shared, it all lingered in the space between them. Emily's eyes softened. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, just barely. Hollywood Icon didn't move. He just waited. And after a long moment, she let out a soft, broken sigh. You're late, she said again, this time her voice full of something else, something that felt a lot like hope. Hollywood Icon let out a breath. I know. And then finally she reached for his hand. Hollywood Icon felt the warmth of her fingers as they barely brushed against his. The hesitation, the lingering doubt, the years of unanswered questions, all of it rested in that small, fragile moment. He didn't move, didn't push. He just stood there, waiting. Emily swallowed hard, staring down at their hands as if touching him would make everything real. This doesn't change what happened, she murmured. Hollywood Icon nodded. I know. Her eyes flickered up to his. I needed you, Hollywood Icon. His chest tightened. I know that too. His voice was raw, heavy with everything he wished he could take back. I should have fought harder for you. Emily exhaled sharply, her emotions swirling too fast to grasp. And now you just show up after all these years and expect what? That we could just pick up where we left off? No, Hollywood Icon said softly. I expect nothing. I just couldn't spend another day not knowing if I had already lost my chance. Her throat tightened. And what if you have? He hesitated, his grip tightening just slightly on her hand. Then at least I'll know I tried. Emily closed her eyes for a second, her breath uneven. When she opened them, there was something else in her gaze. A war between anger and longing. Do you even know what you want? She whispered. Hollywood Icon's answer was immediate. You. Silence. Emily sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers tightening against his. You don't get to do this to me, she murmured, her voice trembling. You don't get to walk back into my life and say everything I needed to hear years ago. Hollywood icon swallowed. I know, and I hate that I didn't say it sooner. She shook her head, biting her lip, her eyes searching his face. I tried to move on. Hollywood icon's voice was barely above a whisper. Did it work? Her breath caught. The question hung between them, heavy and impossible. Then finally, a tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, shaking her head. Damn you, Hollywood icon. A small, sad smile tugged at the corner of his lips. I deserve that. Emily let out a soft, broken laugh. You deserve a hell of a lot more. Hollywood icon nodded, probably. She stared at him, as if trying to memorize the way he looked in this moment. Then, with a trembling breath, she whispered, Are you staying? His fingers curled around hers, grounding her in his warmth. If you'll have me. 1,000 emotions flashed across her face, and then finally, she whispered, I waited, you know. Hollywood icon exhaled, his own eyes burning. I know. She looked down at their hands, at the years between them. Then quietly she said, Promise me you're not going to disappear again. Hollywood icon lifted her hand, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. Promise. Emily let out a slow, trembling breath. And for the first time in 16 years, she let herself believe him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet. But inside, two souls who had once been lost had finally found their way home. And this time, they weren't letting go.